So let's take a look at page 91 of the textbook now. On this page, the author explains the reasons why we use inversions. And this is something that you may already be familiar with. But let's go over this anyhow. So the root position triads in this progression move by fourths. So if we take a look here, we're going from a 1 chord to a 4 chord to a 1 chord to a 5 chord. That means that we're ascending by the interval of a fourth, and then we're descending by the interval of a fourth to go back to the 1 chord, descending by a fourth to the 5 chord, and ascending by a fourth to return to the 1 chord. Keep in mind that the inversion of the interval of a fourth is a fifth. And therefore, this is simply a reflection of the circle of fifths progression, the most powerful progression in all of music. C to F's, down to C, down to G, back up to F. Now this is fine. You might recognize it as your cadence. 1, 4, 1, 5, 1. Okay? The same notes, but it doesn't sound very good that way, right? And the reason it doesn't sound very good is because we're leaping. We're doing these leaps. And these leaps are so large that it's hard to hear the notes as linear and as melodic. So the part writing is not smooth. To adjust this, we're using the closest position of the triads. And by close, we mean that the voices move the minimum distance necessary to get to the next note. So if we take a look here, from the 1 chord to the 4 chord, we know the notes for the 1 chord are C, E, G. Notes for the 4 chord are F, A, and C. So the first thing I'm going to look for are common notes. Well, C and C are the same. That means we can keep them the same. And that's what exactly happens here. The C doesn't move. Okay? E is just a half step from F. So let's move that finger from E to F. And that's what happens. The middle note goes from E to F. G goes up a step to A. So that's what happens here. Do you see how that works? So basically, we're using part writing skills here to keep the movement between voices as small as possible. That's what she means by using the closest position of the triads. Okay? We move back to the 1 chord in reverse order. For the 5 chord, we want to go from C, E, G to G, B, D in the closest way possible. So G will stay the same because they're present in both chords. C is a half step above B, so we'll move the C down to B. And E is a step above D, so we'll move the E down to D. And then, of course, it moves back. Now, if we actually play this, you've been playing this all along. This is the C major cadence. The C major cadence. But now we want to understand why the cadence exists as it is. And the reason is because it follows good part writing rules. And it sounds better to our ears because it's more linear. Now, we can also have the dominant 7. Dominant 7 in C major, G, B, D, F. It just has the F added to it. Now here's the reality. When you're dealing with a 7th chord that has 4 notes, you don't always need all 4 notes. In fact, generally speaking, we want to avoid having all 4 notes, especially when you're playing it in the left hand. It can sound very blurry. I'll demonstrate. If I play all of them together down here, listen. It's very hard to hear. It's not very clear. It's very muddied. So there's a few ways we can voice this. In order for it to be a 7th chord, we need at least 2 notes. Only 2 notes are necessary. We need the root of the chord. So take a look here. We've got the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th. To be a 7th chord, we need the root and the 7th. That's all we need. If you hear the root and the 7th, our ears will automatically fill in the rest of the harmony. Okay, so you can hear that. If I just play the G, that sounds like a G major triad. If I add the F, you hear a G7. Okay, now if I want to fill it out more, I can either use a third, the root third and seventh, or the root fifth and seventh. They both sound good, and they're not nearly as muddy as playing all four notes together. Okay? And here she's indicating that the third is often omitted in a left-hand 5/7 chord, which is true. But I also say the fifth is equally omitted from the 5/7 chord. Okay? So you can play with either version and see which you prefer. So in this next part, we are instructed to play a left-hand 5/7 chord omitting the third. Okay? Supply the omitted third an octave higher in the right hand. So notice we're going to play the omitted third in the right hand an octave higher. So how do we do this? Let's look at the very first example that has been broken down for us. The first thing we need to do is to determine our key signature. We have two sharps, F and C, which indicate that we are in the key of D major. We want to do a 5/7 chord in D major, so we need to determine what the 5 chord is in D major. To do that, we just need to go to the 5th scale degree. So D, E, F sharp, G, A. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 5 chord in D major is A major. So we're doing an A7 here. We're omitting the third, so the left hand's going to play the root, no third, which is the C sharp, the 5th, and the 7th, which is the G. So play that. A, E, and G. And the right hand is going to play the C sharp up an octave, which is the third of the chord. Because we don't need to double any voices, and we certainly do not want to double the third of a 5/7 chord. You may recall, the reason we do not want to double the third is because the third is the 7th scale degree of a key. So in D major, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, the 7th scale degree is C sharp. Well, C sharp is the third of the 5 chord. And the leading tone, the 7th scale degree, always wants to resolve up a half step to the tonic. If we were to double that voice, that is to play the C sharp, the leading tone, in more than one voice, both of those voices would want to resolve in parallel motion to the tonic, which would give us a parallel octave in two voices, which we do not want because it makes it difficult for us to hear the two voices as two separate voices. We'll hear it as a single voice and not two separate voices. That's why parallel motion is not preferable in part writing. So again, the 5 chord, A, E, G, and the third in the right hand. Let's do the next one together. What key are we in? We have 3 sharps. Think about it. And yes, if you said A major, you're correct. Key of A. Now we want the 5/7 chord, which means we need to determine what the chord actually is. So count up 5 notes on the A major scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That takes us to E. I'm going to write the lead sheet symbol up here, E7. Now we're going to figure out the left-hand notes. We're going to notate it in our books. So the lowest note is going to be E. I'll write it down here, E. That's the root of the chord. What's the third? Well, it's G sharp. We're going to omit that. What's the 5th? Well, it's B. And the 7th is D. So that's our left hand. E, E, D. And then for the right hand, we're going to play a third, the third of the chord, which happens to be the omitted G sharp. We're going to do it down here like this. And then you can try playing it. Very simple. You can hear that's very good voicing. If you wanted, you could write it up an octave. Next, We have one flat. What major key are we in? If you said F major, you are correct. Again, we want the 5-7 chord. I'll write the Roman numeral here. And again, we want to write the lead sheet symbol. What is the 5 chord in the key of F? Count up to the 5th scale degree. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Takes us to C. That's a C7. What is the root of a chord of C? Well, it's C. What is the third? It's E. We can go ahead and write the third in the right hand. What's the 5th of the chord? It's G. And what's the 7th? It's a B flat. And then we can try playing this. C, G, B flat, E. Last but not least, 1 sharp. What key are we in? Yes, we are in the key of G major. And again, we're doing the 5-7 chord. What is the 5 chord in G? Let's count up 5 notes from G. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's D7. What is the root of a D7 chord? It's a D. What is the third of a D7 chord? F sharp. We'll write that in the right hand. What is the 5th of a D7 chord? It's an A, and the 7th is a C. And we can play that. So now you understand one of the most common voicings of a dominant 7 chord in music. Not just the piano. You could take this voicing, you could write it for a chorus or a string orchestra, and it's going to sound good. The reason this is such a common voicing is because there's distance between the bass and the tenor voices. They're lower in registration, which means we want more distance, otherwise they sound blurry. If I play D, F sharp, which is perfectly fine as I explained, but it's lower, that's really blurry. Really hard to hear. But D, A, that's still very clear. So if you're writing this for, let's say, tuba and trombone, that works. If you're writing it for double bass and cello, that works. Okay? It still works. And that's page 91. So what you'll do is record yourselves playing through the bottom 4 examples.